eager to be helpful. Mrs. Bell answered with careful humility, her hands folded tightly in her apron. Two distant cousins spoke nervously, their accounts nearly identical in phrasing. And Miss Hartnell, efficient, precise, her voice calm, described her evening with admirable clarity. Yet it was not her words that caught Poirot's attention, but her hands. As she spoke, she twisted a thin strip of paper between her fingers, folding and unfolding it until it frayed at the edges. Poirot's eyes followed the movement with interest. "And you are certain, mademoiselle," he asked gently, "that you did not enter the study earlier in the evening?" She stiffened. "Quite certain, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Alister dismissed me after dinner." "Of course," Poirot said, smiling. "And you would remember if you had pulled a Christmas cracker there, yes?" A flicker crossed her face, gone almost at once. "I don't see why I would have done such a thing," she replied. "Sir Alister disliked them." "Indeed," Poirot agreed, and yet one was the Poirot did not summon the household all at once again. Instead, he allowed the morning to unfold naturally, as though the house itself were guiding the order of revelation. Snow continued to fall outside, softening the world, while inside Everleigh Manor the air felt sharpened, every footstep carrying meaning. One by one, Poirot invited each occupant to speak with him, not in the formality of interrogation, but in the gentler shape of recollection. He began with Colonel Fitzroy, who greeted him with hearty confidence, as if cheer might still be a defence. They sat in the drawing-room, the remnants of Christmas morning untouched on a side table. "You were together in this room at midnight," Poirot said lightly. "All of you." "Indeed we were," Fitzroy replied. "Remarkably punctual evening, now that I think of it. Alister insisted on it. Said traditions mattered. And yet," Poirot continued, "Sir Alister himself was not here when the bells rang." The Colonel hesitated, just briefly. He excused himself before then. Said he had accounts to check. Perfectly ordinary for him. Did he seem troubled? "No more than usual," Fitzroy said, then added quickly, "which is to say, not at all." Poirot nodded, storing the correction away like a folded note. Mrs. Bell was next, seated stiffly at the edge of her chair. She spoke carefully, as though each word had been rehearsed in the kitchen before being allowed into the open. She confirmed that Sir Alister had returned to his study alone after dinner, and that she had not seen him again. "You dusted the study before supper," Poirot said. "You are quite certain there was no Christmas cracker on the desk then?" "Quite certain, sir," she replied. "Sir Alister liked order. He wouldn't abide scraps or toys among his papers. And the wastebasket?" She blinked. "Emptied earlier that day." Poirot thanked her kindly, noting the faint relief in her shoulders as she left. Relief tinged with something else. Fear, perhaps, that she had said too much or not enough. The cousins, Gerald and Miriam Green, were questioned together at their own request. Their answers mirrored one another so closely that Poirot felt as though he were listening to an echo. They had been in the drawing-room all evening. They had not left. They had not argued with Sir Alister. They had no reason to wish him harm. Gerald spoke quickly, filling silences before they could form. Miriam nodded in agreement, her hands clasped tight, her eyes fixed on Poirot's moustache rather than his face. "And yet," Poirot said gently, "you both mention hearing the study door close sometime after 10. "Yes," Gerald said at once. "A sharp sound. Strange." Poirot replied, "For Mrs. Bell recalls no such sound, and the study door, as you know, is very solid. It does not close sharply unless encouraged." Their confidence wavered just slightly, like a candle in a draught. Last came Miss Hartnell. She entered the study with composure, her posture straight, her expression professionally neutral. Poirot offered her the chair opposite the desk. She declined and remained standing. "You are devoted to Sir Alister," Poirot said. "I was his secretary," she replied. "Devotion was part of the role." "Indeed. And his habits, you knew them well? Better than anyone?" Poirot gestured toward the desk. He disliked frivolity here. "And yet a Christmas cracker appeared." Her lips tightened. "Anyone could have placed it there." "Of course," Poirot said. "But you are the only one who knew precisely when this room would be empty, and for how long." She met his gaze steadily. "Are you accusing me, Monsieur Poirot?" "No," he said softly. "I am listening." A pause stretched between them. Outside, a carriage passed, its wheels muffled by snow. "You brought correspondence to the study near midnight," Poirot continued. "Yet you found the door locked." "Yes, And earlier in the evening you were seen handling crackers at dinner." Her breath caught, only for a moment. "Everyone was, but not everyone tears blank paper so neatly," Poirot said, producing the narrow strip he had found. "You fold paper often, mademoiselle. When you think—" Silence followed. Not the silent Poirot retreated once more to the study, not to examine objects this time, but to let the voices he had heard arrange themselves into patterns. He sat with his hands folded, eyes half closed, while outside the pale winter light shifted across the snow. The crime no longer felt impossible. It felt over-designed. Someone had tried too hard to make it neat, and neatness, Poirot knew, was often born of fear. Sir Alister Green's life, when examined closely, revealed a careful distribution of power. His will had been generous, but generosity could conceal control. Each beneficiary received enough to be grateful, but not enough to be free. Colonel Fitzroy depended on a pension supplemented quietly by Sir Alister's investments. The cousins relied on allowances that arrived promptly and without explanation. Mrs. Bell's husband's medical care had been arranged through Sir Alister's influence, and Miss Hartnell's position, well paid, respected, rested entirely upon his continued favour. Everyone had been comfortable. No one had been independent. Poirot began with the Colonel. Fitzroy's motive, if one looked for it, lay not in money but in pride. Sir Alister had funded several of his ventures, and recently those funds had begun to tighten. A man accustomed to command does not enjoy quiet correction, and yet Fitzroy's alibi was firm, too firm. He had been in company, loudly present, eager to be remembered. Poirot suspected resentment, but resentment alone rarely chose a paper knife and a locked door. The cousins offered a different tangle. Gerald's debts were discreet but significant. Miriam's engagement had recently been broken, and Sir Alister's opinion had played a role. They stood to inherit more if the will were altered, but it had not been. Killing Sir Alister changed nothing for them except the timing of grief. Their fear, Poirot sensed, was not of exposure but of suspicion itself. Mrs. Bell's motive was quieter. Gratitude, loyalty, and perhaps resentment intertwined. She had been in Sir Alister's service for years, her life shaped by his household. If he had threatened to withdraw support for her husband's care, that might have driven her to desperation. But she lacked opportunity. Her movements were known, her presence constant. And she was not a woe. Man who staged riddles, that left Miss Hartnell. Poirot disliked easy conclusions, and yet the threads kept returning to her. She knew Sir Alister's schedule, his habits, the exact moment when the study would be empty and when it would not. She handled his papers, his correspondence, his secrets. And secrets, Poirot reflected, were rarely one-sided. He reviewed the alibis again. All had been together at midnight, yes, but Sir Alister had died before then. The bells had merely announced the discovery, not the moment of death. The fire had been banked, not freshly tended. The ink on the ledger had dried hours earlier. The murder had likely occurred well before the guests gathered, perhaps even before dinner ended. So why the emphasis on midnight? Why the locked-door theatrics? Poirot's thoughts returned to the cracker. A childish object, absurd in its presence. Its blank message suggested not absence but removal. Something had been written and taken away, or meant to be taken away. A signal, perhaps, or a warning that failed to reach its recipient. He summoned Miss Hartnell once more, this time not to accuse, but to observe. She arrived composed, though the strain showed now at the edges. "You managed Sir Alister's correspondence," Poirot said. "Including letters he did not wish others to see. Yes. Recently, had there been disagreements?" She hesitated. He intended to dismiss me. The words fell between them, heavy at last. He had discovered something, she continued, her voice controlled, that I had altered a letter. A harmless thing, I thought. He said it was betrayal. "And he meant to expose you, to ruin me," she said quietly, "professionally, socially. He gave me until Christmas Day to resign quietly." Poirot nodded. "Fear then, real fear. But still not enough. Did you kill him?" Poirot asked gently. "No, and yet," Poirot said, "you prepared something. A message, perhaps, a way out." She looked away. The next morning the household was startled by the constable's sudden announcement. He had called in reinforcements from the county, and by mid-morning a small contingent of officers was scouring Everleigh Manor anew. There was excitement in their steps, pride in their eyes. They had discovered what they claimed was the breakthrough that would end the case. A footprint, faint but unmistakable, had been found in the snow beneath the study window. Its size matched that of Colonel Fitzroy's boots, and the constable, emboldened, was already drafting a press statement that declared the matter solved. The colonel, to his credit, seemed genuinely baffled. "But I was never outside at all," he protested, though his protest was hurried and a bit defensive, as if he feared that denial might now be considered suspicious. The officers examined him carefully, but satisfied themselves with the apparent match. The neighbours, called in to verify, claimed to have seen a man of Fitzroy's stature moving near the house late at night. Within hours the story had grown, a midnight crime, solved by the tireless work of the constabulary, and the public could rest assured that justice was done. Poirot, however, remained seated in the study, observing the flurry with an expression of polite detachment. He allowed the officers to parade their discovery, to triumph in what they believed was a decisive clue. He even complimented their diligence in a soft, non-committal manner, as though encouraging their self-congratulation. Yet beneath his composed exterior his mind raced. Something about the footprint, about the timing, did not align with the details he had quietly collected. He had noticed the way the snow outside the window had been brushed, as if intentionally disturbed, the way the latch bore tiny marks inconsistent with the colonel's stride. It was a staged scene, designed to comfort those eager for resolution. Miss Hartnell approached him while the constable was busy orchestrating the search. "Monsieur Poirot, do you believe it is truly him?" she asked, her voice low, tinged with hope and uncertainty. Poirot shook his head ever so slightly. "No, mademoiselle. This is but a spectacle, a magnificent smoke-screen. You see, the criminal enjoys very much the applause of fools who believe they have caught the truth, and fools will applaud anything that seems simple." He rose and moved to the desk, his eyes tracing the faint crease on the blotter again. The blank strip of paper, the carefully placed cracker, the timed arrangement of events, all suggested planning, calculation, and patience. A killer who could manipulate perceptions so neatly would hardly be exposed by a footprint in the snow. By mid-afternoon, the household had settled into a brittle sense of relief. Colonel Fitzroy, though bewildered, allowed himself to relax, assured that the matter would soon be closed and his name cleared. The cousins exchanged uncertain glances, relieved that suspicion had veered elsewhere. Mrs. Bell quietly returned to her duties, and even Miss Hartnell seemed reassured, though her hands remained fidgeting with the thin strip of paper she had kept hidden in her palm. Poirot, however, sensed a subtle shift in the air, almost imperceptible. The household's relief, he noted, carried an undercurrent of anxiety, an anticipation that perhaps someone had not been fully satisfied by the supposed resolution. And in this anticipation lay danger. The true criminal, cloaked in patience, had seen the authorities stumble. They had watched as others stepped into the trap of their own eagerness, and now they waited, confident that the final mouvement. Poirot spent the evening in quiet contemplation, sitting near the study window as the snow fell in thick, silent curtains. He revisited every detail, replaying the interviews, the odd behaviors, the subtle deceptions he had observed. Often the key to understanding a crime lay not in the bold strokes, but in the quiet corners of memory, the faintest echoes of the past that connected seemingly unrelated people. He thought of Sir Alister's meticulous records, the ledger, the correspondence, and a small yellowed envelope he had glimpsed in a drawer now emptied by the constable. He asked to see the household archives, letters and papers that had long been deemed mundane. Mrs. Bell, hesitant but obliging, produced bundles of Sir Alister's documents, carefully tied with ribbon. Poirot sifted through them, seeking patterns rather than content, and then, almost by accident, he paused at a series of letters from years prior. They involved a business dispute, settled quietly, yet the names mentioned struck him, Fitzroy, and a lesser-known relation of the cousins. Intrigued, Poirot read further. The correspondence revealed that Sir Alister had, decades before, uncovered an embezzlement scheme involving the Colonel and Gerald's father. Though the matter had been quietly resolved, Sir Alister had kept meticulous records. The cousins, he noted, were likely aware of this, though young at the time. The letters hinted at quiet resentment, subtle threats, and a lingering fear of exposure. The past, it seemed, had never been fully forgotten. Poirot then examined Miss Hartnell's correspondence, small slips of paper she kept tucked in a private ledger. At first glance they seemed innocuous. Schedules, meeting notes, mundane reminders. But a few letters stood out, addressed in faint, careful script to a Mr. Gregory, a name previously unknown to Poirot. These letters contained subtle warnings, references to mistakes, and allusions to debts not yet paid. Poirot's sharp mind He seed together that Miss Hartnell had been entwined in a network of obligations that connected her, Fitzroy, and the cousins in ways previously invisible. The revelation created a web of connections, greed, pride, fear, and familial duty intertwined, rooted not in the immediate quarrels of Christmas Eve, but in decades of unresolved tension. Fitzroy's pride and concealed debts, the cousins' latent grievances and inheritance expectations, and Miss Hartnell's fear of professional ruin, now formed a lattice upon which a criminal mind could act. Each person had motive, opportunity, and history, but only one could have orchestrated the deceptive scene so flawlessly. Poirot called for Mrs. Bell to fetch him the guest register from years past, tracing patterns of visitors, meetings, and overlapping stays. A few names recurred, long forgotten, but their presence suggested that Everleigh Manor had, over the years, been a silent stage for intrigues and alliances now resurfacing. The detective's eyes twinkled as he realized that the Christmas night murder was not only a reaction to current circumstances, but a culmination of quiet grudges and secret dealings stretching back years. He recalled the carefully positioned cracker on the desk, the blank strip of paper, and the timing of events. The killer had relied upon the predictability of the household, yes, but also upon the unspoken bonds and old resentments that had festered unobserved. By manipulating memory, expectation, and decorum, they had created a scene that distracted the authorities while concealing the intricate personal history driving the crime. Poirot gathered the household once more, his presence calm but commanding. He began to outline gently the threads that linked them, not as accusation yet, but as observation. The past, he explained, was rarely dead. It breathed, shaped actions, and whispered reminders that the most careful lives are vulnerable. One of them had understood this truth too well and had acted decisively. As he spoke, subtle reactions emerged. Fitzroy shifted in his chair, a muscle tightening near his jaw. The cousins exchanged a glance that was almost imperceptible, but enough to betray awareness. Miss Hartnell's hands fidgeted with the edge of her apron, as though holding back a secret she had long feared would surface. Poirot noted each flicker, each hesitation, knowing the past had cast its shadow upon the present, and the person who had wielded it as a weapon had done so with careful precision. By the end of the evening, Poirot had reconstructed the hidden lattice of motives, histories, and secrets that converged in the study on Christmas Eve. He stood in the quiet of the snow-dusted room, confident that the threads were now visible to him alone. The crime, intricate as it was, had roots that stretched deep into time, and understanding those roots would be the key to revealing the hand that struck with such careful deliberation. End would come when least expected. That evening, as the lamps flickered against the heavy curtains and snow continued its quiet accumulation outside, Poirot stood once more in the study. He traced his finger lightly along the desk surface, considering every mark, every shifted object. The constable had celebrated too soon, the colony of officers too eager to declare victory. The killer had allowed it. They always did, when certain of their intelligence. Poirot's gaze rested on the fireplace. The logs had been turned deliberately. The poker leaned at a specific angle, small signs of human presence orchestrated with care. He thought of the cracker, the blank paper, the timing of the study's empty hours. Yes, the criminal had deliberately placed the clues, knowing that others would interpret them incorrectly. The stage was set, and the audience, fools and friends alike, had fallen into their roles. As Poirot left the study to inform the household that the investigation was, in truth, far from concluded, a faint smile crept across his face. The game was not over. It had merely entered its final, most perilous act. The true criminal remained in the shadows, patient, deliberate, and cunning, waiting for the moment when the illusion of a solved case would allow them to strike again, or perhaps to vanish entirely, leaving nothing but whispered questions and the cold, unbroken silence of Everley Manor. Poirot did not press. The maze of motives was tightening. Fear here, resentment there, greed lurking beneath gratitude. Someone had used Miss Hartnell's fear to construct a performance, a locked room, a foolish cracker, a midnight discovery. The killer had known the habits of all, had relied on their silence and their comfort, and now, Poirot sensed, the time was approaching when the web would tremble. One strand, pulled gently, would reveal which motive had turned lethal, and which had merely been convenient. Of refusal, but of calculation. "I loved my employer," she said finally, "but love does not mean ignorance." Poirot inclined his head. "No, often it means the opposite." As she left, Poirot remained seated, the pieces shifting slowly in his mind. Each voice had offered truth wrapped carefully around a mission. Alibis aligned too precisely, memories sharpened or dulled as convenience required. Somewhere between the locked door and the foolish cracker lay a motive not yet spoken aloud. What had begun as an impossible crime was becoming merely difficult, and Poirot knew with quiet certainty that difficulty was the enemy's last refuge before collapse. After the gathering dispersed, Poirot returned to the study alone. He stood where Sir Alister had fallen, then moved to the desk and sat in the sea. Aligning himself precisely as the victim must have been. From this angle, something became apparent. A faint crease on the blotter, as if a small object had been pressed there repeatedly. Poirot traced it with his finger, then looked toward the wastebasket. Inside, beneath crumpled drafts, lay a torn strip of paper, narrow and blank. Poirot's smile deepened, but his eyes were grave. The cracker, the blank message, the locked door, these were not distractions. They were signals, arranged with care. Someone in Everley Manor had wanted the crime to appear impossible. And someone, Poirot now suspected, had underestimated the danger of seeming too calm when nonsense was involved. The first lie had surfaced, not yet enough to accuse, but enough to promise that the truth, when it came, would be precise, deliberate, and devastating. His gaze moving not to the body, now removed, but to the room itself, he examined the fire, the windows, the door, and finally the desk. His eyes lingered on the empty space where the cracker had been, and a faint, almost indulgent smile touched his moustache. "Ah," he murmured softly, as though greeting an old acquaintance. "It is always so at Christmas. The smallest trifle, dressed as nonsense, wishes very much to be ignored, and yet it is precisely there, in what seems most foolish, that the truth hides itself." Outside, the bells rang again for Christmas morning, bright and innocent. Inside Everley Manor, the crime remained unsolved, but not, Poirot knew, unsolvable. Poirot spent the following morning arranging the household in the drawing-room once again, but this time with a method decidedly his own. He had little interest in formal interrogation. What he sought was subtle reaction, the almost imperceptible twitch that exposed truth buried beneath practiced composure. The room was bright, the snow outside glittering, and yet a tension hummed quietly in the air, like the faint vibration of a bowstring. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice soft, almost conspiratorial. "We have spoken much of alibis and habits. We have examined doors, windows, and footprints. But sometimes the truth hides in what one believes to be trivial. A human being, left to their instincts, will betray themselves in small ways." He gestured toward a small table where a selection of Christmas crackers had been placed. Not ordinary crackers, but identical to the one discovered in the study. The police found one in the study, yes? A simple object, they thought, perhaps even meaningless. But Monsieur Alister's killer is a careful planner. They use such objects to mislead. And yet, Poirot paused, fixing his gaze on Miss Hartnell, who sat stiffly at the far side of the room. "We shall see if a little curiosity will tempt truth from its hiding place." Poirot then conducted a small experiment. He asked each household member to open a cracker and remove its contents, encouraging them to speak about the little surprises inside. For most, the exercise produced smiles or indifferent murmurs. The cousins laughed, Colonel Fitzroy made a theatrical exclamation, and Mrs. Bell handled hers delicately, almost reverently. Each reaction was predictable, measured. Miss Hartnell, however, froze the moment Poirot offered her the cracker. Her fingers trembled slightly, the first visible sign of tension. She accepted it, but rather than pulling it open, she examined the wrapper with intense scrutiny, as though memorizing it, then slowly unfolded the paper within, her movements deliberate to the point of unnaturalness. Poirot leaned forward, voice gentle. "And what do we find, mademoiselle?" he asked. She looked up, her eyes meeting his with a flicker of something almost imperceptible, fear, calculation, perhaps recognition. "Nothing," she said. Her voice steady, yet a strange tension lurked beneath it. "It is empty, as expected." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, Mesnon, you see, we are not concerned with what is expected. We are concerned with the unexpected, yes? Tell me, what were you thinking as you handled it?" She hesitated, then said, "I thought of the one in the study, the one Sir Alister found." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, catching the subtle crack in her composure. "Ah, yes, the study, you recall it vividly, and the paper, yes, the strip within, was it a message?" Her fingers froze again, the paper twisting slightly in her hands. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, her mind apparently racing. The room was silent, the others oblivious to the tension, smiling at the small ceremony of holiday play. But Poirot saw. He always saw. "Everyone," he said softly. "We have spoken of alibis, but we have not yet tested what the mind hides when given a choice to reveal it. Sometimes a simple object, expected to amuse, will compel memory and conscience to surface." He leaned back, watching her closely. "You thought of removing a message, did you not? You knew it must be replaced carefully, yet you did not anticipate that handling another cracker might betray your thought process." Miss Hartnell's hands trembled now, a subtle but undeniable signal. She pressed the paper to her chest as if to hide it, but the telltale hesitation spoke louder than words. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The psychological pressure had succeeded. The controlled, deliberate manner of the killer, previously impervious to casual observation, had finally been nudged, small, yet sufficient to reveal a fissure in the carefully constructed facade. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch, observing the micro-expressions, the slight tightening of shoulders, the way her gaze flicked to the door before returning to him. Each subtle motion confirmed the link between her and the contrived elements of the study, the cracker, the paper, the timing. The experiment had not provoked confession, but it had produced a reaction more valuable than any statement, a crack in deception through controlled exposure. Finally Poirot rose, straightening his jacket and smiling with satisfaction. "Patience, mes amis," he said softly. "The truth will come, not by force, but by the clever orchestration of observation and timing. And now we have seen where the first real fault lies, hidden within the calmest of masks." Outside, the snow continued to fall quietly, covering the grounds in white, while within Everleigh Manor a human mask had begun to slip, revealing the carefully concealed truths beneath. Poirot, serene and watchful, knew the final act was approaching, and that the killer had just revealed the first involuntary sign that would lead to exposure. Late that evening, Poirot returned to the study to examine the desk once more, intending to review the ledger and letters that had hinted at the tangled history linking the household. The room was silent, the snow outside muffling any sound, the fire casting long shadows along the walls. He had been so certain that the subtle reactions he had observed earlier would provide the next step toward the truth. But upon reaching the desk, he froze. The narrow strip of paper, the blank message from the Christmas cracker, was gone. Not a trace remained. Poirot's eyes scanned the floor, the wastebasket, even the inner folds of the desk drawers. Nothing. The meticulously placed cracker, the folded paper, the minor traces of manipulation he had catalogued so carefully, all vanished. He did not panic. He did not shout. Instead, he moved with the calm deliberation of a man who understood the mind behind the act. Someone had removed it, obviously after observing the morning. Experiment. Someone who now understood that the detective had begun to discern patterns, and that exposure was imminent. The act was brazen and deliberate. Poirot turned to the household, calling them into the drawing-room once again, though this time his tone carried quiet steel rather than gentle observation. Mrs. Bell arrived first, followed by the cousins, Colonel Fitzroy, and finally Miss Hartnell. Their expressions ranged from mild concern to polite alarm, but none yet grasped the magnitude of what had occurred. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his hands folded, voice steady. "We are now faced with a most curious development. A piece of evidence, crucial in its subtlety, has disappeared. A strip of paper, apparently empty, yet containing information no one but the murderer would wish to remove. It has vanished." He allowed a pause, letting the weight of the statement settle, and the disappearance was not accidental, it was deliberate. The household shifted uneasily. Colonel Fitzroy opened his mouth, then closed it. Gerald and Miriam glanced at one another, too late concealing the tension in their posture. Miss Hartnell, pale but composed, seemed almost unreadable. Yet Poirot's keen eye noted a micro-expression, the twitch of her fingers, the slight narrowing of her eyes. "This," Poirot continued, "indicates that the individual responsible is not only cunning, but anticipates our observations. They attempt to mislead, to delay, to protect themselves. And in doing so, they reveal themselves by the very act of interference." The detective returned to the study, inspecting every surface, every drawer, and even the fireplace with meticulous attention. The fire had been banked, but he noted tiny marks along the hearth's edge, almost imperceptible scratches that suggested a careful reach to retrieve something hidden. The window showed no signs of disturbance beyond the previously staged scratches, indicating that the object had been removed from within, not from outside. Poirot gathered the household once more, and this time his gaze rested on each individual in turn. "Consider the implications," he said softly. "Someone among us has taken deliberate steps to hide evidence, confident that the disappearance would mislead us. They act under the belief that the detective's patience is limited. But patience, mes amis, is a weapon as precise as any dagger." Miss Hartnell's composure wavered ever so slightly, her eyes flicking to the fireplace, then toward the desk, before returning to Poirot. The subtle shift was almost invisible, yet sufficient for the detective to note. In the absence of the paper, Poirot realized, the challenge had intensified. The stolen evidence was a calculated attempt to delay discovery, yet it had inadvertently confirmed which mind was orchestrating the deception. The household grew tense as whispers began to circulate, small suspicions forming, alliances and mistrust intertwining. The constable had arrived earlier for routine checks, and now appeared uncertain, noticing only the polite tension rather than the underlying game. He could not comprehend, nor would he, the finesse behind the removal, the precise manipulation designed to misdirect. Poirot finally addressed the room, voice calm, but filled with quiet authority. "The disappearance of the evidence is not a setback, mes amis. It is a sign that our suspect is clever, yes, but impatient, and perhaps reckless in small ways. The proof may vanish, but the mind that acted cannot entirely erase its traces. Our path forward is illuminated not by the object itself, but by the choices made to conceal it." Outside, the snow fell heavier now, blanketing Everleigh Manor in silence. Inside, a tension like a taut string vibrated through the household. Poirot, serene yet alert, understood that the game had entered a new stage. The criminal had revealed both daring and desperation, and the detective knew that each subsequent move would be watched and countered. The stakes had risen, trust had fractured, and the delicate balance of concealment and observation now tilted ever closer to the ultimate revelation. The morning after the vanishing of the crucial evidence began with a brittle, uneasy calm. The household moved with care, as though afraid of disturbing some invisible balance. Poirot, however, remained alert, aware that the theft of the paper was not merely a diversion, it was a signal. Someone among them was not finished, and the game had grown sharper, more dangerous. Poirot had barely settled in the drawing-room when a scream pierced the quiet. It was high, urgent, unmistakably fearful. He rose immediately, the household trailing behind him, and hurried down the corridor toward the source, the East Wing guest rooms. There, the scene that greeted them froze even Poirot's precise mind for a moment. Colonel Fitzroy lay on the floor at the foot of a bed, unconscious but breathing. His clothes were disheveled, a deep gash on his temple suggesting a violent fall, or perhaps an attempt to incapacitate. Miss Hartnell knelt beside him, her eyes wide, hands trembling, while Gerald and Miriam stood frozen near the door, expressions a mix of horror and confusion. Poirot knelt, feeling the colonel's pulse. "Alive," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "But this, mes amis, is not an accident." The detective's gaze swept the room, noting every detail. The window was closed, the heavy drapes undisturbed, the furniture bore no signs of struggle except for the fallen chair near. The bed. Poirot's eyes settled on the bedside table. A small, opened Christmas cracker lay there, contents strewn carelessly, its paper crown crumpled. The same kind of object that had played a subtle part in the previous day's revelation. Poirot's mind raced. The criminal had escalated. The removal of the paper was no longer sufficient. They were now willing to harm, even attempt murder, to conceal or redirect suspicion. The question was precise. Why Fitzroy? And why now? He motioned for everyone to step back, closing the door to the hallway. "This," he said quietly, "is a clear message. The individual responsible is aware of our scrutiny. They wish to intimidate, perhaps even eliminate witnesses. And the target, Colonel Fitzroy, is not chosen at random." Mrs. Bell, voice trembling, asked, "But why him? He was helpful. He has been nothing but cooperative." Poirot shook his head. "Precisely. The person behind this act knows which minds are observant. They wish to disrupt the investigation, to create fear, to test us." Miss Hartnell, pale, remained near the colonel, her hands clenching the edge of the bedspread. Poirot observed her closely, noting that her composure was fraying, the faint twitch of her fingers, the subtle avoidance of his gaze. Yet her reaction, though anxious, did not suggest guilt. Not directly. It suggested awareness and, perhaps, dread. Poirot instructed that the colonel be attended to and kept under close watch. Then he returned to the room, examining the fallen chair, the scattered contents of the cracker, and a faint smear on the floor near the bedside rug. It was small, easily overlooked, yet significant. Someone had intended to stage the scene as an accident, yet the effort carried subtle imperfections, signs of haste, tension, and the unmistakable hand of a careful planner forced to act quickly. The detective moved to the window, noting its pristine E condition. The entry had not been forced. The attack had occurred entirely within the room, meaning the perpetrator had been inside or had never left. The criminal was still in the house, still observing, still several steps ahead, and Poirot felt the gravity of the challenge deepen. This was no longer a solitary murder. It was now an active, escalating threat. Poirot gathered the household once more in the drawing-room, voice calm yet edged with authority. "Mes amis, the situation has changed. We are not merely seeking a solution to a completed crime. We are now confronting a mind that acts in real time, manipulating events to conceal truth and create fear. Our task is to protect, observe, and anticipate. The murderer remains present. They are clever, patient, and dangerous, and each of us must remain vigilant, for the next act may arrive suddenly, without warning, upon anyone, anywhere in this house." The household exchanged uneasy glances. Whispers moved like shadows across the room. The snow outside, once a quiet blanket, now felt oppressive, a reminder of isolation. Poirot, standing near the fireplace, surveyed them all, aware that the game had entered its most perilous phase. The criminal's boldness was a challenge, a signal that only keen observation, subtle deduction, and patience could overcome. The clock ticked, the snow fell, and the murderer, hidden but close, prepared their next move. Poirot spent the rest of the day quietly observing, listening, and piecing together the subtle dissonances that had gone unnoticed by the rest of the household. Each person moved with caution now, aware that danger lingered, yet Poirot noticed that even caution could betray itself. He walked the halls, retracing steps, examining objects that seemed mundane, and revisiting conversations that had felt complete. The trick, he reflected, was always in noticing what others dismay. It was a small detail that first caught his attention, the way Miss Hartnell had arranged the Christmas crackers on the table during yesterday's psychological experiment. At first, it appeared purely ceremonial, a polite nod to tradition. But Poirot had observed her hands, the slight hesitation, the meticulous alignment of each cracker. He recalled the previous day, the moment she had paused over the blank strip of paper, almost instinctively, then replaced it with a calculated composure. That hesitation had seemed minor, almost invisible, but it was a reaction entirely consistent with someone accustomed to planning, to controlling appearances, and to hiding evidence under the guise of normality. Poirot returned to the study, now emptied and silent, and examined the desk once more. He noticed a faint indentation along the blotter, not in the center where he had previously focused, but at the edge nearest the door. A small object had been pressed there repeatedly. He realized it matched the narrow strip of paper stolen days earlier, and that the placement was deliberate. Someone had hoped it would be overlooked. The criminal had left the clue in plain sight, knowing that the apparent triviality would deceive the casual observer. His thoughts then turned to the Christmas crackers scattered around the house. Each had been handled carefully by the suspects in Poirot's experiment. One, in particular, had been moved more than the others, the one nearest Miss Hartnell's chair. Her hand had hovered over it, a micro-expression of recognition passing across her face when she realized Poirot had noticed. The same subtle action, repeated during casual conversation and in her presence near the study, had been overlooked by everyone else, yet now it clicked. The cracker was never about the joke, nor the paper inside. It was about the placement, the attention, the calculated con. Troll of perception. Poirot gathered the household again, not in alarm but in quiet observance. He allowed everyone to speak, to move, to arrange objects on the table. He noted who aligned the napkins perfectly, who hesitated when handling the silverware, who adjusted the position of a chair when no one was looking. Over the hours, a pattern emerged. Each subtle motion, each careful placement, corresponded to the earlier incidents. The disappearance of the paper, the staged footprint, the attack on Colonel Fitzroy. It became evident that the murderer had relied on consistency, habits, attentiveness to detail, and a thorough knowledge of the household's rhythms. The pattern was psychological as well as physical. A carefully placed object, a measured gesture, a pause too long or too short, each revealed intent, timing, and opportunity. The criminal was not just someone present in the house, they were someone intimately familiar with every nuance, every expectation, every behavior of the others. Poirot paused before the fireplace, reviewing the mental map he had constructed. The subtle cues all pointed to one individual, yet no accusation was spoken aloud. The pattern was clear to him alone, the cracker, the paper, the hesitation, the meticulous alignment of objects, the careful observation of reactions. All of it formed a trail of breadcrumbs that led not outward, but inward, toward the person most deeply enmeshed in the routines of Everleigh Manor. He watched as the household moved through the evening, each action unfolding naturally. The pattern revealed itself in the repetition of small gestures, the symmetry of movement, the consistent micro-expressions that no one else noticed. Poirot's eyes twinkled behind his moustache. The key to the case had been in plain sight all along, hidden in plain view by the very predictability of human behavior and the meticulous control of one clever mind. By the time the lamps flickered low, casting long shadows across the snow-dusted floor, Poirot had assembled the invisible lattice, connecting the incidents, the motives, and the behaviors. The pattern emerged not in the grand gestures, not in the overt evidence, but in the subtle, deliberate orchestration of ordinary actions. And now, he understood fully, the final move, the revelation of the killer, would require only the patience to let the pattern speak for itself. Poirot remained in the drawing-room long into the night, observing the household with a calm patience that only he possessed. He had seen the pattern, traced the subtle gestures, mapped the micro-expressions, and noted every hesitated movement. Yet the full motive, the spark that had ignited such a carefully orchestrated crime, remained elusive. Motive, he reflected, was not always obvious in the tangible sense of money or revenge. Sometimes it lay hidden within the delicate architecture of the human mind. He summoned Miss Hartnell once more, and she entered quietly, her hands folded, a faint pallor on her face. Poirot invited her to sit, but she remained standing, composed yet tense. He studied her silently for a long moment, then spoke in his gentle, deliberate manner. "Mademoiselle, you are a person of intelligence, habituated to precision, yes? Your movements, your attention to detail, all reveal a mind accustomed to control. But control over what exactly? She met his gaze, and for a fraction of a second, the veneer of composure faltered. Her fingers fidgeted, a small but unmistakable signal. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon Dieu, there it is. The smallest twitch reveals what words cannot. He leaned forward, voice calm, almost conversational. You feared Sir Alistair, yes. Not only for the consequences of a single misdeed, but because he represented something larger, an authority, a Jew. D.G. meant, a dominance that you could not bear to submit to. And in your mind, fear transformed into something else, something that justified extreme measures. You desired deeply to assert control where it had been denied. Miss Hartnell's lips parted as though she were about to speak, then closed them, struggling with the weight of her own conscience. Poirot continued softly. The theft of the paper, the manipulation of the cracker, the careful orchestration of the room. It was never about greed. It was never truly about power or inheritance. It was about preserving your sense of autonomy, protecting your self-image, ensuring that you would not be diminished by exposure or humiliation. Her eyes flickered downward, then back to him, and Poirot noted the subtle shiver in her posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. The truth, he understood, was more complex than even she had allowed herself to recognize fully. The first murder, Poirot said, was designed to remove the obstacle. Sir Alistair's discovery of your small deceit in your mind threatened to unravel all you had built, your position, your security, your dignity. And so you acted, carefully, to control the narrative, to ensure no one else could interfere. He allowed a pause, letting the weight of the observation settle. The second act, the attack upon Colonel Fitzroy, was not intended to kill none, but to divert, to create fear, to obscure the pattern that was emerging. You saw the detective's attention turning toward you, and instinctively you attempted to manipulate, to delay exposure. Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. This is why ordinary motives, money, revenge, jealousy, do not suffice. They are merely convenient explanations for those who cannot perceive the architecture of a mind driven by fear, by desire for control, by the desperate need to preserve oneself. You acted not out of malice toward the world, but from an inner terror that the world might diminish you. Miss Hartnell's composure finally broke. She sank into the chair, hands clasping the edge of the seat. Her voice, when it came, was low and tremulous. I did not mean for it to go this far. I only wanted to protect myself, to prevent humiliation. I never wanted anyone else hurt. Poirot nodded gently, as though he had expected this confession, though the subtle anguish in her tone confirmed the depth of her psychological burden. Yes, mademoiselle, and therein lies the danger. The mind, when gripped by fear and the desire for control, will construct elaborate measures. You created a stage, and in doing so, misled us all. You believed, perhaps, that intelligence alone could protect you. Yet the truth has a way of emerging, no matter how carefully one hides it. He stood, moving to the window and gazing at the falling snow, the soft white curtain outside almost serene against the dark revelations of the house. The crime, though meticulously planned, reveals the profound human elements behind it. Fear, the need for control, the desire to protect one's dignity at any cost. These are far more powerful motivators than mere avarice. And it is this psychological force that drove the acts we have witnessed, shaping events with precision and deliberation. Poirot turned slowly, eyes fixed on Miss Hartnell, who remained seated, pale but relieved. The layers of deception, carefully constructed and hidden in plain sight, had been peeled away. The true motive, the inner terror that compelled her actions, was now revealed, more shocking in its intimacy than any calculation of wealth or revenge could ever have been. For in her, Poirot saw the full complexity of human psychology, the lengths to which a person might go when confronted by the fragility of self, and the extreme measures taken to preserve it. Poirot spent the remainder of the evening arranging the household with deliberate precision, not to manipulate, but to observe. He allowed the servants and remaining guests to retire, leaving only those whose movements and reactions could reveal the final truth, Miss Hartnell, the cousins, and Colonel Fitzroy, now fully recovered, though wary. The detective understood that the final act required subtlety, a moment when the guilty mind, pressed by circumstance and observation, would reveal itself. He requested that the drawing-room remain dimly lit, the lamps casting long shadows along the walls. Every chair, every object, every insignificant ornament was placed according to his plan, each intended to elicit a reaction. Poirot had arranged the same type of Christmas cracker that had first exposed Miss Hartnell's hesitation, now opened and displayed across the table. He did not speak of it. He allowed it to exist quietly, a silent stimulus. The household assembled, each taking their places, their nerves taut, their curiosity heightened. Poirot remained standing, calm and composed, as though the events of the past days were merely a prelude to a gentle conversation. Yet beneath the surface lay a storm of anticipation. "Mes amis," Poirot began softly, "we have observed each other over these past days, and we have seen, sometimes in the smallest gestures, sometimes in the subtlest reactions, the truths that words might conceal. But now we reach the moment when the hidden may be revealed." He gestured toward Miss Hartnell, who met his gaze steadily, but with a slight quiver at the corners of her eyes. "Mademoiselle, we have traced the pattern of events, the subtle manipulations, and the disappearances of evidence. We have observed hesitation, overcare, and the careful orchestration of objects meant to deceive. All of this points to one mind, intimately familiar WI. This household, yet fearful of exposure." The cousins exchanged nervous glances, and Poirot allowed a slight pause, letting the tension build. He had learned that pressure was a tool. It allowed truth to emerge from concealment. "Now, mademoiselle," he said, voice calm but resolute, "I ask you to tell us, in your own words, why Sir Alister Green was killed, why Colonel Fitzroy was attacked, and why the evidence vanished. The time for subterfuge is over." Miss Hartnell's lips trembled, and for a moment silence reigned. Then slowly she spoke, her voice low but firm. It was fear. "I feared that Sir Alister would ruin me. He had discovered my minor deceit, something trivial in his eyes, but to me it threatened everything. I could not bear the thought of losing my position, my dignity, my life under his judgment. I acted to protect myself." Poirot nodded, encouraging her to continue. "And the attack upon Colonel Fitzroy? I intended only to frighten him. He was observant, asking questions, noticing things I had hoped to conceal. I did not want to harm him permanently, only to create diversion and buy time." "And the paper?" Poirot asked gently, gesturing toward the desk. Miss Hartnell swallowed hard. "I removed it. I knew it contained evidence that could link me to Sir Alister's death. I feared that if it were found, everything would be revealed." Poirot allowed a faint smile to play upon his lips. "And now, mademoiselle, the truth is out. You see, fear drives clever minds to extreme measures, but no matter how meticulous, no deception can withstand patient observation. The human heart betrays itself in small, consistent ways, and these I have observed." Miss Hartnell lowered her head, tears glistening. I only wanted to survive," she whispered. "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot replied softly, "and yet survival cannot be purchased at the expense of I fay and trust. The stage is now complete. Your confession spares further danger to others, and the law may take its course. As the reality of the revelation settled upon the household, the atmosphere shifted from tension to a heavy, reflective quiet. The cousins, Colonel Fitzroy and Mrs. Bell, all watched with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The intricate web of manipulation, careful deception, and psychological pressure had finally unraveled, revealing the motives hidden within the deepest recesses of the mind. Poirot moved to the window, gazing at the snow-draped landscape outside. Calm, composed, he reflected that human nature, with all its fears, vanities, and desperate desires, had dictated the events of this Christmas night. And though the criminal mind had acted with remarkable cunning, patient observation, attention to subtle details, and careful orchestration of behavior had revealed the truth, as it always must. The final confrontation had not required force, only insight, patience, and the unerring understanding of human psychology. The case of death at midnight on Christmas Day had reached its resolution, and Poirot, as ever, had orchestrated the closing act with the precision of a master conductor, allowing the truth to emerge naturally from the stage he had so carefully set. The household had settled into a fragile calm. Miss Hartnell's confession had seemed to close the case, the tension easing from the room as if a storm had passed. Colonel Fitzroy, now fully recovered, sat quietly by the fire, while the cousins exchanged glances that mixed relief and lingering unease. Poirot, however, did not relax. He walked slowly among them, hands clasped behind his back, eyes alert. Something remained unresolved, an almost imperceptible dissonance in the pattern he had observed, a subtle note out of key. He returned to the study, where the faint traces of the varnish shed paper had once rested. He examined the desk, the drawers, the floor, even the folds of the blotter. His sharp eyes caught a detail that had eluded him, a minute indentation beneath the left-hand corner of the blotter, nearly invisible to the casual observer. It was different from the mark left by the earlier disturbance. Someone had pressed something there recently, someone who had had both knowledge and opportunity, perhaps even the knowledge of Poirot's methods. Poirot's mind raced, connecting dots that had appeared disconnected. Miss Hartnell had acted out of fear and desire for control, yes, but the precision of the staging, the subtle manipulations, the timing of the second attack, it all bore the signature of guidance. A hand had steered the events, subtly but insistently, behind the scenes, and that hand had remained in the shadows, observing each act, ensuring that the outcome would appear as Miss Hartnell's alone. He gathered the household once more, his tone calm but charged with gravity. "Mes amis, we have believed the case concluded. Miss Hartnell's confession seemed to provide a tidy resolution. Yet," Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on each face in turn, "there is a final piece of the puzzle, hidden not in what was done, but in who may have orchestrated the circumstances that compelled such actions." A silence fell, tense and uncertain. Even Miss Hartnell shifted in her chair, a flicker of unease crossing her features. Poirot continued, "The paper, the cracker, the patterns of hesitation. These were your actions, mademoiselle, but guided. Someone observed, instructed, and allowed you to act, shaping events without stepping into the open. And so we must ask, who among us has the knowledge, the patience, and the subtlety to orchestrate a human mind so completely?" His gaze fell upon Colonel Fitzroy, who started slightly, then composed himself, his expression unreadable. Poirot's keen eye noticed the micro-expression, a fraction of hesitation, a slight tightening around the eyes. "Ah," he murmured softly. "Yes, the true mastermind has been here, quietly, controlling the stage, allowing fear to act as their proxy, not for power, not for money, but for something far more cunning. Influence, the thrill of manipulation, the proof of intellectual superiority." Poirot's voice sharpened. "Colonel Fitzroy, it was you, n'est-ce pas? You observed, nudged, and allowed Miss Hartnell to act, testing her, testing all of us. The attack, the stolen evidence, the staged footprint, it is not merely a set of random events, but a symphony conducted from your chair. Your knowledge of the household, your understanding of human psychology, your patience, all of it points to your hand behind the veil." The colonel rose abruptly, a flicker of anger and surprise crossing his features. "Monsieur Poirot, preposterous." Poirot held up a hand, calm and commanding. "Examine your own movements, Colonel. Recall the minute traces, your footsteps near the study, the adjustments to objects you claimed to overlook, the subtle guidance you offered Miss Hartnell under the guise of counsel, the thrill of influence, the orchestration of chaos. It is clear. You sought not merely to observe, but to direct, allowing another to bear the weight while you tested your own cleverness." Colonel Fitzroy's composure cracked. His voice was low, defensive. I did not harm anyone. I only guided. It was a game, a test of intellect. I never intended—" Poirot nodded, understanding the psychological complexity. "Ah, but mes amis, the line between manipulation and crime is thin indeed. One can arrange circumstances, influence minds, and yet still bear moral responsibility. The final twist is that the true danger was not the immediate act, but the unseen hand direct. Fear and deception, hidden beneath the mask of propriety. The household sat frozen, the air dense with shock. Miss Hartnell's earlier confession now seemed a fragment of a larger design, and the detective's insight revealed the final layer, The orchestration of events, subtle and unseen, was the true mark of genius and of danger. Poirot, serene and unshakable, had unveiled the last, most dangerous mind in the room, the one who had controlled the stage from the shadows, proving that even the most careful observation can leave room for one last, devastating twist. Outside, the snow continued to fall silently, but with Everly manner, the final revelation had shattered the calm. Poirot's keen intellect had illuminated not only the actions of the guilty, but the intricate psychological architecture behind them, leaving the household to confront a truth more unsettling than any they had imagined. That crime could be conducted as art, and its architect could remain invisible until the very last moment. The room was thick with tension, a silence broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. The household sat rigid, eyes shifting between Poirot, Miss Hartnell, and Colonel Fitzroy. The revelation of the true mastermind, the man who had orchestrated the events from behind the scenes, had left a chill that not even the snow-covered landscape outside could soothe. Poirot, calm and poised, allowed the silence to stretch, knowing that the weight of comprehension often struck more profoundly than words alone. "Mes amis," he said finally, his voice even but carrying an unmistakable authority, "the events that unfolded within these walls were remarkable, yes, but not inexplicable. Every detail, every hesitation, every seemingly trivial act concealed meaning. Let us recount them, so that all may understand the path to the truth." He moved deliberately about the room, pointing out the subtle details, the slight pressure marks on the blotter where the missing paper had rested, the alignment of the Christmas crackers that revealed Miss Hartnell's subconscious hesitations, the faint scratch along the hearth near the study where evidence had been manipulated. Each sign, minor on its own, had formed a pattern when viewed collectively, one that led not merely to the person who had acted in panic and fear, but to the mind that had orchestrated the conditions which forced such acts. Poirot's gaze fixed on Colonel Fitzroy. "You, Colonel, have the advantage of intellect, patience, and observation. You understood the household, the dynamics, the vulnerabilities. You nudged events carefully, letting Miss Hartnell act on impulses you knew would arise. Her fear, her desire for self-preservation, her hesitation, all these you guided like a conductor with a symphony. And yet, in your meticulous orchestration, you overlooked one simple fact: human reaction, even when guided, betrays itself in minute details. The twitch of a hand, the pause in speech, the subtle alignment of an object, all of these revealed the underlying truth." Colonel Fitzroy's face tightened, the faintest shadow of a smile, or perhaps a grimace, passing over his lips. He opened his mouth, then hesitated, seemingly weighing his options. Poirot, as always, anticipated the moment. "Justice," he continued softly, "is often about uncovering not just the act, but the mind behind it. Miss Hartnell confessed her actions, motivated by fear, but the mind that guided her from the shadows remains accountable. Yet, mes amis, human cunning is not absolute. There are always traces, clues that the keen eye can discern when others see only chaos. I observed these from the first day, and though the Colonel's cleverness delayed resolution, it could not erase the P.A. Turn entirely." Poirot's eyes swept over the household again, noting each reaction: Miss Hartnell's mixture of relief and residual guilt, the cousin's astonishment, and Fitzroy's controlled composure. "We have, then, two threads, one of action born of desperation, and one of orchestration born of intellect. The law will now consider each carefully, but it is clear to me that both acts, those committed openly and those guided unseen, are bound by consequence." Colonel Fitzroy straightened, voice measured but cold. "Monsieur Poirot, perhaps the law will see my actions differently. I did not physically harm anyone. I merely observed, guided, influenced. Surely that does not constitute the same culpability as murder." Poirot smiled faintly, never dismissing the complexity of the human mind. "Ah, Colonel, influence can be as lethal as any weapon when wielded with precision and intent, and though no direct act of violence may be proven, the orchestration of events that led to harm, fear, and death is, by its nature, an act for which one must answer. The law may debate the nuances, but the truth, as revealed by observation, is undeniable." The household sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the duality of justice revealed. Miss Hartnell would face consequences for her direct actions, yet the Colonel's fate remained uncertain, a shadow hovering over the proceedings. The unsettling thought lingered. Intelligence and cunning could, at times, shield one from immediate justice, even as the moral responsibility stood starkly illuminated. Poirot finally moved to the window, gazing at the snow-covered grounds of Everley Manor. "The brilliance of observation," he murmured, "is to discern what others overlook. The smallest hesitation, the most trivial object, the quietest detail. These can betray the grandest designs." And so justice, in its many forms, is served, not always perfectly, not always visibly, but in the unerring logic of truth. Outside, the snow continued its silent descent, covering the world in white, serene and impartial. Inside, the household understood the final lesson. Crime, no matter how clever, leaves footprints, patterns and traces. Poirot, as always, had been one step ahead, revealing both the acts and the minds behind them, even as some mysteries, veiled by intellect or circumstance, would linger in the shadowy corners of human morality. The household had settled into an uneasy calm. Miss Hartnell had been escorted to her room under the careful supervision of the authorities, her earlier confession weighing heavily on her, while Colonel Fitzroy remained in the drawing-room, quietly observed by the staff, his expression unreadable. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows along the walls, and Poirot, standing by the window, looked out at the snow-laden gardens of Everley Manor. The night was silent, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the trees, yet his mind remained alive with thoughts, reflections, and lingering questions. He had resolved the major threads, the murders, the manipulations, the stolen evidence, but a subtle unease tugged at him. Even with Miss Hartnell's confession and the exposure of the Colonel's orchestration, something remained unresolved, almost imperceptible yet persistent. He recalled the smallest details, the alignment of a teacup on the sideboard, the faint smell of cigar smoke in a room where none smoked regularly, the almost invisible scratch near the window latch that had gone unnoticed until now. Each by itself seemed trivial, yet Poirot knew that human behavior, like a complex machine, often left traces precisely where one did not expect. He moved silently through the drawing-room, hands behind his back, pausing at the desk where so much of the drama had begun. The B.L. Otter had been restored, the scattered letters returned to their proper order, and yet he noticed a small curl of paper beneath the edge of the desk, barely protruding, easily overlooked. He reached down carefully, extracted it, and unfolded the note. It was brief, cryptic, and unsigned. "Observe beyond what is seen, not all is revealed." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, a faint smile curling at the edge of his moustache. The note was a provocation, a challenge, and a reminder that the world of human deceit never truly concluded with a single resolution. The criminal mind was capable of misdirection, half-truths and mysteries yet unspoken. He folded the paper with meticulous care, tucking it into his coat pocket, a token of the unfinished business that lingered in the shadows of Everley Manor. He stepped toward the door, pausing to glance back at the household one final time. There was relief, yes, but also tension, suspicion, and uncertainty. Miss Hartnell's actions had revealed the fragility of human fear. Colonel Fitzroy's subtle manipulations had demonstrated the hidden currents that could shape events unseen. Yet, even in the apparent closure, Poirot sensed the faint tremor of secrets not yet uncovered, connections not yet fully understood. As he walked down the long, dimly lit corridor, the sound of his footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floors. The household had begun to return to routine, but he knew that routine could mask truth, and that truth often surfaced where least expected. Poirot's mind, always vigilant, catalogued every nuance, every pattern, every anomaly. He understood that the case of death at midnight on Christmas Day would linger in the consciousness of those involved, not as a neat ending, but as a lesson in human complexity, deception, and the fine line between action and manipulation. He reached the front door and paused, glancing once more at the snow-covered grounds. The quiet majesty of the night offered a sense of finality, yet he felt the faint pulse of anticipation, as though the note had been more than a message. It was a reminder that mysteries never truly end, that the human heart could always conceal yet another twist, and that his work was never done. Poirot stepped into the crisp night air, the snow crunching lightly beneath his feet, his mind alive with the possibilities that lay ahead. Everley Manor receded behind him, the windows glowing faintly, a silent witness to events now concluded and yet, in some small way, still unfolding. He did not hurry, for he knew the world always held new puzzles, new patterns to discern, and new minds to unravel. The case was closed, the immediate danger resolved, but the lingering question, subtle and insistent, promised that another mystery, perhaps even more intricate, awaited just beyond the horizon. And so, with measured steps, Hercule Poirot disappeared into the snowy night, leaving behind a household forever altered, a tale concluded yet unsettled, and the quiet certainty that the dance between deception and detection would continue, as inexorable and captivating as the falling snow itself.